Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She said it like she was reading a legal clause, not talking to her husband. "You're not entitled to my body." And I just nodded. Because in that moment, I realized something she didn't. I wasn't entitled to her body, but she was never entitled to my life either. We were at a rooftop dinner she'd organized for her boutique investors. A table surrounded by people who smiled too much and drank too slow. She liked to host these things, expensive, curated evenings that made her feel powerful again. The skyline behind her, the diamond light on her wrist, the waiter refilling her glass before she even asked. Power disguised as grace. I noticed him that night, the bartender. Young, tan, too eager. He kept looking at her like she was a scene he didn't want to end. She noticed him too. It was subtle. The way her tone softened when she ordered, how she laughed a little longer than necessary. The kind of laugh you don't waste on your husband anymore. She was wearing a white Lululemon jacket over her shoulders when she said it, the line that would split our marriage in half. "You're not entitled to my body." The people at the table laughed, thinking it was just a bold feminist joke. I didn't. I just went quiet. After dinner, she posted a photo from the night, her hand on the wine glass, captioned, "Boundaries are power." It got 2,000 likes before midnight. I saw the bartender like it too. That was when the silence inside me turned into a decision. The next morning, she left early for a board meeting. Her Tesla key fob was on the counter. Mine was gone. I took the truck, my old Ford F-150, and drove to the coast. Sat in the parking lot behind that same restaurant, watching her reflection in the bar window while she talked to him again. Laughing, tilting her head like a teenager pretending to be free. I didn't go inside. I didn't confront her. I just stayed there long enough to know it wasn't about love. It was about control. She wanted to feel wanted by someone who didn't know what she'd already ruined. That night, I came home late. She was on the couch, scrolling Amazon on her iPhone, pretending not to care. The house smelled like a Target candle, vanilla and denial. I sat across from her, calm, unreadable. She asked if I was okay. I said I was. But something shifted that night. She didn't notice, but I stopped answering halfway through her sentences. I stopped reacting. I stopped trying. She thought I was retreating. I was actually rebuilding. By the end of that week, she'd start to feel it, the silence, the distance, the lack of interest. But by then, it would already be too late. I had already begun to disappear. A week later, the first crack showed itself, not in what she said, but in what she didn't. She started avoiding eye contact during breakfast, scrolling her phone like the world inside it mattered more than the one sitting across from her. Every now and then, she'd laugh softly at something on her screen, then lock it, too fast. I already knew. The bartender. I'd seen the messages the night before, the kind of empty sentences people use when they want to feel desired without risking anything real. "You make me feel alive. You actually listen." Words that mean nothing until you realize someone else is saying them to your wife. I didn't confront her. I didn't rage. I watched. I studied the pattern, when she texted, when she smiled, when her breathing changed slightly reading his replies. I was done guessing. I wanted to know the truth, clean and sharp. Her phone backed up automatically to our shared iCloud. It wasn't even hard to find. A few photos. A receipt from that same beach bar. 2 glasses of wine, one untouched. His hand visible in the reflection. That night, she came home late. She smelled like the ocean and cheap cologne that wasn't mine. I didn't ask. She talked about some networking dinner, still wearing the same earrings from the night we met, Tiffany and Company, the ones I bought her after her first store opened. I wondered if she even remembered. I started changing my own routine. Went to the gym earlier, worked longer hours. The Tesla lab was quiet after dark, and I liked that. The sound of machines building the future was cleaner than any human voice. Every night, she expected me to ask, to break, to demand an answer. I didn't. I just grew colder. Distance became my armor. She thought my silence was weakness, that she still had control because I hadn't spoken. But silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. One evening she tried to test me. Wore a new dress, poured me a drink, smiled like nothing had changed. But her eyes gave her away. There was guilt in them, flickering like static. I met her smile with a quiet nod and said nothing. By the time she fell asleep, I was already outside, sitting in my truck under the dim porch light. No music, No phone, just stillness. That was the night I decided how this story would end. Not with shouting. Not with revenge. Just absence. She had crossed a line she couldn't redraw. And I had learned the one truth she'd never understand. Sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is nothing at all. It didn't take long for the evidence to pile up. Not just texts or photos, patterns. The kind you only notice when you stop hoping. She started leaving the house earlier, dressed too perfectly for inventory checks. The boutique chain was just an excuse now, a polished cover for afternoons that didn't belong to work. I tracked nothing, accused no one, but every move of hers drew a sharper outline of the truth. One Friday afternoon, I left work early. The team at Tesla thought I'd burned out. They were wrong. I just needed silence. I parked a few blocks away from that same beach restaurant where we'd once spent our anniversaries, where we used to order the same drink and talk about building a future. She was there. Of course she was, at the corner of the bar. The bartender leaned close, listening like he'd found some lost melody in her voice. She looked younger around him, or maybe just more desperate. The kind of light that comes not from joy, but from escape. Watching her, I didn't feel anger, just distance. Like I was observing a stranger rehearsing a role she didn't even believe in. She left around sunset, her laughter fading into the sound of the waves. I waited 5 minutes, then walked inside. The place smelled like citrus and salt. I sat in her seat, ordered the same drink, and let the silence fill the space she'd just left. The bartender didn't recognize me, just another quiet man in a gray jacket, paying his bill in cash. That night, I opened our shared account on my laptop. She'd withdrawn a few hundred in cash that afternoon, same amount she'd spent there the week before. The pattern was perfect, careless, rhythmic, predictable. I saved nothing. I deleted nothing. I just looked, memorized, and closed the screen. When she came home, she was humming, still carrying the scent of someone else's cologne. I was sitting on the couch, phone off, TV dark. She looked at me like she wasn't sure what version of me she'd find. I stayed calm. She talked about needing space, about how people grow differently. She was building a script in her head, one where she could betray me and still call it empowerment. I didn't argue. I didn't even nod. I just looked at her once, long enough for her to feel something shift in the room, and went upstairs without a word. That night, she slept beside a man she thought she'd already defeated. But she didn't know I'd stopped being her opponent. I was already out of the game. It happened quietly. No warning, no message, no fight. Just a clean break from the life I'd outgrown. One evening, I drove her to a charity gala downtown. A marble hall full of empty smiles, cameras, and people pretending to care about causes they'd never touch. She thrived in those spaces. The flash of attention, the way people turned when she entered. It was her natural habitat, admiration as oxygen. She looked flawless that night. Perfect hair, perfect posture, the perfect mask. I helped her out of the car, kissed her cheek, and said I'd park. She didn't notice that I never came back. I drove instead to a small motel off the highway, the kind with flickering neon and silence that feels earned. I turned off my phone, my cards, everything that linked me to her orbit. For the first time in years, I slept without noise. The next morning, her calls started. Dozens of them. I didn't answer. Then the texts came, at first irritated, then concerned, then panicked. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about control. Her words read like someone losing grip on the narrative. Where are you? This isn't funny. We need to talk. I said nothing. Silence was finally my language. Over the next week, I stayed invisible. Worked remotely, paid cash, no digital trace. My colleagues thought I was on a personal retreat. Maybe I was. In those quiet hours, I started reprogramming my life. New accounts, new plans, new version of me. No resentment. Just precision. She must have gone back to the bar. Probably looked for comfort in the same place she'd found her illusion of power. But now the story didn't fit. The bartender wasn't her rebellion anymore. He was a mirror showing her exactly what she'd become, ordinary in her chaos. A friend of hers called me by accident one night, unaware I was gone. I overheard just enough. How she'd shown up at her boutique in tears, how her staff whispered about my sudden disappearance. I imagined her sitting in her office, scrolling through old photos of us on her iPhone, searching for something warm in a life that had gone cold. I didn't disappear to hurt her. I disappeared to heal. She used to think boundaries were power. But what she was feeling now wasn't power, it was absence. And absence has a way of echoing louder than words ever could. When you disappear, you learn who people really are. Within 2 weeks, the silence started doing my work for me. She called my office, my friends, even my sister. The story spread fast, but no one knew the truth. All they knew was that I'd gone quiet, and that she was unraveling. The woman who once commanded rooms now stumbled through them, trying to rewrite a story that had already finished. But I wasn't just gone. I was watching. I saw everything from a distance, clean and detached. Through a private message from an old coworker, I learned about her new friendship falling apart. The bartender had become careless. Photos of him with another woman started circulating. Someone younger, someone not wearing diamond earrings. The same gossip channels that once posted her events were now hinting at her affair, framing it like a cliché. The boutique queen and the beach boy. I didn't send those photos, but I knew who did. People talk when they sense weakness, and her empire ran on perception. I'd built my life on logic, but hers ran on attention. Now both were turning against her. At Tesla, I worked quietly, pouring my energy into a side project I'd been building for months. The silence gave me focus. Every late night in that lab became fuel. By the end of the month, a message arrived from SpaceX. They'd seen my work. They wanted to meet. While my name was moving upward, hers was being whispered downward. Her assistant leaked a few things online: financial inconsistencies, unpaid invoices, a rumored affair. I didn't push it. I didn't need to. All I did was stop protecting her. She must have felt it, the air tightening around her. One night she sent an email, a long one. No apology, just confusion. She wrote, "You disappeared like I never existed." I read it 3 times, then deleted it without replying. She had finally learned what absence feels like when it doesn't beg to be filled. By the time the SpaceX contract was signed, I'd moved into a small apartment overlooking the water. No decorations, no noise. Just a desk, a laptop, and silence that felt earned. She thought she'd liberated herself by setting boundaries. What she never realized was that I had learned to build walls higher than hers could ever reach. Boundaries protect, but silence isolates. And she was starting to feel both closing in on her at once. The shift came quietly, like a change in weather. People stopped answering her calls the way they used to. Invitations slowed down. The same women who used to orbit her suddenly had other commitments, new circles, cleaner reputations. Her name wasn't whispered with envy anymore. It was whispered with discomfort. It wasn't because of me. It was because she had lost control of the story. One of her boutique investors pulled out, citing personal distractions. Another replaced her on a charity board. The image she built, poised, independent, untouchable, was cracking in public view. And in her world, reputation was oxygen. I heard pieces of it through mutual friends. They didn't realize I was listening, but their tone told me everything. They said she'd been showing up at that same beach bar again, alone this time. The bartender had quit, moved to another city. Without her audience, her rebellion had no stage left. Sometimes I drove past the old neighborhood. My truck, the same Ford F-150 she used to mock for being too blue-collar, looked like it belonged everywhere she didn't. Her boutique's billboard was still up near the freeway, smiling, perfect, artificial. But I'd seen the emptiness behind that smile up close. It no longer carried weight. I wasn't angry anymore, just detached. My silence had become a mirror, and she was finally forced to look into it. That's when I started hearing from people we used to know, her old assistant, a few business partners. They'd start conversations with the same line: "I don't know what happened between you two," but then they'd describe the fallout. Missed meetings, canceled launches, panic behind closed doors. One night, she posted something online, a photo of us from years ago, her caption carefully chosen: "Sometimes you lose what was never really yours." It looked poetic, but I knew what it was, a signal flare. She wanted sympathy without admitting guilt. I didn't respond. I was already somewhere else, emotionally and geographically. The new project at SpaceX was consuming my time, sharpening me again. Every day, I felt more like myself and less like the man who once needed her approval. Her downfall wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, private, and complete. That's the thing about social power. It doesn't collapse loudly. It just fades when no one's watching. And the silence she once used as a weapon had finally turned against her. Her isolation grew like fog, slow at first, then heavy enough to choke the air around her. I didn't need to see it. I could feel it through the silence that used to belong to me. The call stopped. The post slowed. The confident, curated woman she'd built online was shrinking, pixel by pixel. People around her started to move differently. Her business partner sold his share quietly, distancing himself from the rumors. The boutiques that once buzzed with her presence now ran on autopilot, managed by people who stopped mentioning her name. Without an audience, her confidence evaporated. Control doesn't survive in a vacuum. Sometimes, I caught myself wondering what she looked like now, whether her smile had the same brightness or if the weight of her choices had begun to show. I didn't search her name. I didn't need to. The world has a way of revealing what's meant to be seen. One night, after a long shift, I stopped at a Waffle House off the interstate. I sat by the window, ate in silence, and realized how different peace felt when it wasn't borrowed. The truck was parked under a flickering sign, the kind of light that feels honest, ugly but real. She would have hated that place. That used to matter to me. Now it didn't. She, meanwhile, had started reaching out to mutual acquaintances again, asking casual questions about me, where I'd gone, what I was doing, whether I was seeing someone. But she didn't ask me directly. Pride wouldn't let her. Control had been her religion, and now she was worshipping the ruins. I had seen a photo of her by accident, shared in a group chat. She was at some event, smiling too wide. The kind of smile people wear when they're pretending not to be alone. The caption under it read, "Rebuilding Stronger." But her eyes told another story. Tired, lost, searching for the reflection of someone who wasn't there anymore. I never responded to the whispers or questions. I let the silence carry its own message. The truth is, she wasn't my responsibility anymore. Her loneliness wasn't my revenge, it was her consequence. I didn't leave her to teach her a lesson. I left because I'd already learned mine. Some people only understand the value of connection when there's nothing left on the other end of the line. And for her, that silence was finally permanent. It was almost 6 months before I saw her again. Not by design. Just one of those collisions life sets up to test how far you've really moved on. I was meeting an investor at a cafe downtown, the kind of place where ambition hums louder than the espresso machine. She walked in halfway through my meeting, wearing black, polished, still trying to project control. But there was something different now. Her confidence had the texture of glass. She didn't see me at first. She ordered a latte, glanced at her phone, probably scrolling through the remains of a life she once curated to perfection. When our eyes finally met, she froze. Not dramatically, just a small pause, like her brain was trying to decide whether to look away or pretend it was fine. I stayed calm, almost still. She walked over eventually, hesitating at the edge of my table. Her voice was soft, practiced, uncertain. She said it was good to see me, as if the months of silence were a technical glitch, not a choice. I looked at her for a long second, then nodded once. She started talking, filling the air the way people do when they're afraid of what silence means. She mentioned how busy she'd been, how she'd taken time to refocus. Every sentence was armor, but none of it landed. The version of her that once dominated rooms now sounded like an echo trying to convince itself it still mattered. When she asked if I'd been okay, I almost laughed. Not out of spite, just at the irony. Because I'd never been better. The quiet, the work, the distance, it had all built something stronger than what I'd ever been inside that marriage. She was the one trembling now, trying to hold on to a story that had already ended. She said she missed talking to me. I didn't respond. I just looked at her, calm, detached, like a scientist observing a past experiment that failed. When she realized I wasn't going to rescue her from the silence, she tried to smile, said she had to go. I nodded again. As she walked out, I saw her reflection in the window, small, fragile, searching for validation that wasn't coming. I didn't feel pity, just clarity. That moment confirmed what I already knew. She hadn't lost me. She'd lost access to the version of me she could control. And once a man takes that back, there's nothing left for her to own. A few weeks after that cafe meeting, she started reaching out again, this time directly. It began with short texts, polite, neutral, almost businesslike. Hope you're doing well. I saw your name in that article about SpaceX. Congratulations. I didn't answer. Silence, once uncomfortable, had become my boundary. And boundaries, unlike hers, required no announcement. Then came the longer messages, ones that sounded more like confessions than updates. She wrote about missing our routines, how no one ever understood her the way I did. I could almost hear her voice through the words, soft and trembling, like she was afraid of what it meant to feel something again. But I had learned by then, regret isn't the same as realization. Regret just means the audience left before the show ended. She called one evening. I watched the phone light up on the table and let it ring until it stopped. She tried again. The third time, I picked up, not out of curiosity, but closure. Her voice broke as soon as I said hello. She said she'd made mistakes, that she didn't know who she was back then, that she was experimenting with freedom, but it had only made her feel emptier. She said she'd give anything to start over. Her words came out fast, desperate, rehearsed, but still raw. I listened in silence. When she realized I wasn't going to fill the gaps, she asked if there was someone else. I told her there wasn't, and that there didn't need to be. That was the moment she went quiet. For once, she didn't know how to control the conversation. She asked if I could meet her, just to talk. I said maybe. Then I hung up. I didn't promise anything, and that uncertainty was what shook her most. For years, I'd been predictable, steady, loyal, available. Now I was a question she couldn't answer. That night, she posted another photo. A throwback this time. Us, years ago, smiling outside a Target after grocery shopping. Her caption read, "Funny how we only realize the best days when they're gone." Thousands liked it, but I knew every like just deepened her loneliness. The next morning, I deleted her number. Not out of anger, but peace. She used to believe freedom meant doing whatever she wanted. Now she understood. Real freedom is being at peace when no one's looking. And I had finally found mine. The last time I saw her was almost a year to the day after I left. I didn't plan it. Life just has a way of bringing unfinished stories full circle. It was a quiet Sunday morning. I'd stopped by a small cafe near the water, the kind of place where no one knew my name, and that was the point. I was sitting by the window, reading emails on my MacBook, when I looked up and saw her outside. Alone. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but in presence. The woman who once filled every room with noise and perfume now moved like someone trying not to be seen. Her hair was shorter, her expression softer, less performative. She stood there for a moment, holding a cup of Starbucks coffee, staring through the glass as if she wasn't sure whether to come in or keep walking. She did come in. Slowly. She didn't wear makeup this time, and there was something disarming about that. She asked if she could sit. I nodded. The silence between us felt heavy, but not hostile, more like the last few minutes before a storm finally passes. She said she'd been thinking about that night at the rooftop dinner, the one where she told me I wasn't entitled to her body. Her voice cracked when she said it. She admitted she thought boundaries made her strong, that detachment meant freedom. But all it ever gave her was distance, from everyone who ever tried to love her. I listened quietly. I didn't rescue her from the truth. She said she'd lost almost everything since I left. The boutiques were struggling, investors gone, friends silent. She said she finally understood what I meant when I told her she wasn't entitled to my life. I finished my coffee and stood up. She looked at me, eyes wet but steady, waiting for something, an opening, a promise, a sign that forgiveness meant return. But I had nothing to give her except peace. I told her I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. She nodded, like she'd been waiting to hear that line since the day I left. Then I walked out. The air outside was cold, clean, and silent. Somewhere behind me, she stayed sitting in that cafe, staring at the door like it still connected to the life she'd lost. But it didn't. That chapter was already closed. And for the first time in years, I felt completely free. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.